Hello and welcome back to the channel. Samuel Richards here, Common Sense Bodybuilding, and today we're going to be talking about if it fits your macros, the dieting approach where protein, carbohydrates and fats are what matter most. Is it any good? What are the pros? What are the cons? And are there actually any rules behind arguably the most flexible dieting approach in the industry? Well, today we're going to cover that and so much more. So without further ado, let's get into it. So let's start off by talking a bit about why it's used, the pros and the cons. So generally speaking, I think the overriding reason why if it fits your macros has risen in popularity lately is because the increasing amount of scientific evidence that actually those metrics are the most important values in terms of body composition and progress. It's hard to argue that hitting your macronutrients and calorie goals for the day is going to do more for you than the finer details that often come with a meal plan. That's not to say that a meal plan wouldn't still be most optimal, but if it fits your macros, just highlights the most important aspects and simplifies it to allow for life to happen. Because let's face it, a meal plan isn't very flexible. Day to day, if you're on the go, well, you still got to fit those 6 meals in, those 6 exact foods, and that is your ritual. However, if it fits your macros, you're able to pop to the local Tesco, the local Waitrose, however bougie you want to go, pick up a meal deal, pick up a ready meal, as long as it fits within your macronutrient goals, you're all good. So it's incredibly useful when you're traveling and you're unable to prep food. Another major benefit of if it fits your macros is budget. Let's face it, a bodybuilding meal plan is focusing on what's optimal. Now, does that mean that wild caught Alaskan salmon and fillet steak are optimal? Probably. So you've got to account for the fact that sometimes you're not going to quite have the monthly budget to shovel in, say, £300 worth of food. So it does reduce the barrier of entry to bodybuilding, and most people that you see will start off when they're younger on an if it fits your macros approach because they simply can't find the financial support for a fully optimal bodybuilding diet. The further benefit of if it fits your macros is specifically focused on the contest prep and diet side. However, I do believe there are some key drawbacks to this, which I will get into later. But it does allow you to feel the notion of suffering less. Concepts like volume eating have risen in popularity more and more. Let's face it, with the rise of social media and people able to give all their hacks, people are of course going to take them, move them to the extreme, and try and find ways around the suffering that naturally comes with the sport.
Buy my freaking cookbook!
Now, to me, mentally, that's not a game that I want to play, and I've suffered for it in this last prep. However, for some who are able to sort of do that and not mentally get caught up in the obsession, it can be a really useful tool in order to curb the hunger pains and improve satiation throughout some pretty extreme diets. So what are the negatives? Well, I just alluded to one. It can lead to obsession. Honestly, if it fits your macros does allow for anything. You can fit almost anything within a day's diet.
Pop-Tarts!
However, that can lead to over-restriction in some parts of the day in order to account for binging or account for terrible food choices later on. And it can lead to also obsession in terms of optimizing what you're eating. So focusing on sweeteners that aren't any calories and, trying to find ways to get certain foods, which are really not optimal for bodybuilding, into your daily plan. And that's, I guess, the second con, is that a lot of people tend to focus on fitting junk into their plan, alongside the obsessive thoughts and, the tendency to become incredibly food focused. The fact of the matter is that does lead to junk food making its way into your diet. Now, it may not be traditional high-calorie junk food, but it may be lower-calorie hacks and bulk meals, volume eating, and it's just not sustainable. Fitting in pizzas and burgers and all that kind of stuff into your diet is only going to take you into the mental headspace of how much can I get away with? What can I do? How far can I take this? So the third point to consider, I guess, on the sort of cons list, and these are really all connected, is that how good that diet is depends on the discipline of the person. This allows for a hell of a lot of personal freedom, which for many people, especially of my generation, may not be the wisest of choices. So you may have multiple athletes, or you may personally, hit the same macronutrients on 2 different days, or if you've got 2 different athletes, they may both hit the same macros on the same days. But the quality of the nutrition between the two are vastly different. Eating beef versus chicken is going to be a big micronutrient difference there. eating salmon versus beef, somebody choosing chips over rice. It's all going to play a factor. And it may not necessarily play a factor in your core body composition, or it may only minimally affect it. However, there will be aesthetic signs that you're not prioritizing your health within your diet. So those are the general pros and cons of If It Fits Your Macros. Let's talk a bit about how you can prioritize your health and what I would describe as best practice. What I would describe as best practice is following the 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule is something that I picked up from Fuad and Luke Sando on the Real Bodybuilding podcast, Bodybuilding and Bollocks. And they talked about how, in their off season, for example, 80% of their food throughout the day is their diet. If they want to eat 20% on top of that, or they want to change 20% of that out, it's absolutely fine. So what I'd recommend you to do is to follow this, because it's really been a saving grace in terms of how clean my diet stays. And it's very simple to follow. 80% of your food and those calories throughout the day should be made up of clean bodybuilding choice foods, or foods which are optimal for the time that you're eating them. For example, personally, I'll start off with a cream of rice because it digests quickly and it's rice-based, which means that it's going to be good, clean food. I'll then have post-workout cereal, which isn't really great, and maybe bagels. So they're sort of suboptimal, but they're still pretty optimal for the time that I'm eating them. It's post-workout, I need simple carbohydrates and I need quite a lot of them. But then my meal 3 and meal 4 are rice-based, rice and beef most of the times. And then I'll have my final meal of the day, which can be a free choice. Sometimes that's ultra clean, sometimes I might have protein pancakes as well as some chicken and rice or something. It allows me the flexibility to have stuff that I enjoy, but it allows me strict rules and moderation. So what other rules come along with If It Fits Your Macros? I mean, it may seem counterproductive, but when you're given personal freedoms, it's always great to have some framework at least to avoid taking the piss in those moments of weakness. Especially if you're on a prep, you're gonna have moments of weakness. So what parameters do we need to consider here, the other rules? Well, first of all, fibre. Personally, with Josh Bridgman, my coach, my rule is 10 grams of fibre per 1,000 calories. I'm about 4,200 calories currently, so that's about 42 grams of fibre throughout the day. This is a great rule to follow. It will help digestion. It will also help with satiation, especially in a diet. That may be difficult in an off season, so maybe you can push it down to 8 grams. Sugar and sweet foods in general. It's been shown that sweet foods, and not just sugary, but also sweetened foods, do not satiate the body in the same way. The way that we react to them in terms of our signal to the brain are different at their core. So naturally, when you're in a diet, you should really be avoiding these because they can lead to a bit of a spiral into the desire for more and more sweet stuff. And unfortunately, when you never feel satiated, it's going to be an endless cycle. Sugar should generally be restricted anyway, and I'm not against sugar at all. I think it's great. It's really, really damn tasty, but you should try and limit it. I try and limit sugar personally to about 10 to 20% of my daily carbohydrates. So you're on a cut, you're going to want pretty much all your carbohydrates to be from clean sources to aid satiation. You've got 200 grams of carbs, or you want potatoes, rice, stuff like that. And that only allows you maybe between 20 and 40 grams of sugar per day, which is a more than reasonable amount. If you're in the off season, that 10 to 20% might start to nudge into the sort of 100 gram mark, maybe even more, but that's absolutely fine. It's unavoidable to a certain extent, and eating a kilo of carbs from purely clean sources, oh, good luck, my friend. You're a braver man than me. Just to touch on that, I do not believe there are good and bad foods. You can have anything in moderation, in relation to your plan though. If you're trying to fit a food in that's 50 grams of fat and you've got 60 grams for the day, that's not a moderate choice or a reasonable choice to make. Save that for an off-plan meal if you're given that kind of grace, and if not, maybe just avoid that in general. But as I say, sugar and sweet foods do not satiate you in the same way. So no, all foods aren't equal. That is a fact. And yes, as I've said before, you may hit your macro goals, but if you're not getting your micronutrients in, you're not eating clean sources at all, your skin, your health, it's all going to pay for it. I hope that this was helpful. If it was, drop a like, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified for more common sense bodybuilding tips. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.